Please be warned. Inspired by a True Story deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
February 22nd, 1946. A young couple in Texarkana pull over for a little loving. They're then forced out of their car by a man wearing a hood with 2 slits for eyes. The carnage that followed terrified an entire community for months. In 1976, director Charles B. Pierce recreates these crimes in a quasi-documentary style. Be mindful where you park your car for necking, because the town that dreaded sundown was inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. And after listening, or right now, please leave our show a review on your app or share Inspired by a True Story on Reddit or X or wherever you share your true crime podcast. We're going to discuss the overall details of the true crimes, then review the film on its own, how much of that is true and how much was Hollywood magic. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. Joining me today are my fellow film critics and true crime devotees, Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
And John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
Okay, so fun fact, this movie terrified me as a kid. 1976 is The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Does it have the effect anymore?
Nowhere near it.
I was like, what effect?
Bummer.
They tried-ish.
I don't know exactly why it terrified me so much, but when I was a kid, this movie absolutely terrified me.
Maybe it was just because of the plausibility of it being like somebody who just puts on like this random little burlap sack mask and just runs around killing people. It
very much reminded me of, I think, probably Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and also it has a very documentary feel that they're going for, where it's part horror movie, part documentary style, and I think that really got under my nerves. Like, oh, that's real. This could happen. And I'm sure I watched it when I was way too young to watch it as well.
I would say that would probably have a lot to do with it, because like I can't, as an adult, I can't see how this would be scary, especially like tonally, it's everywhere. It's almost a Lifetime movie these days.
Yeah, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, it really is. It's totally everywhere, and it's interesting. But I'm very interested to see how this all got inspired.
Yeah, so we can get into it. So as of this recording, The Town That Dreaded Sundown is streaming on Prime, but this is always subject to change. A hooded killer terrorizes Texarkana, Arkansas in 1946, murdering several innocents before he finally stopped. This masked butcher was never caught. This film is a dramatic recreation of those true-life events, also known as the Moonlight Murders. Had you guys ever heard of the Moonlight Murders before we move on to explain what they were?
I never heard of this movie, nor the murders. And I know, like, beyond everything else, Moonlight Murders is actually kind of like a really quippy name for this.
Like it's almost you feel like it would be a movie made today?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's cheesy? Is that what you're trying to get at?
The entire movie is cheesy. I think we can agree on that, right?
The crimes were real, though. Like a lot of the crimes
are real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was the 40s. They weren't really hip to naming murderers by that time, or killing sprees.
I'm sure some reporter just threw it out, right? They just got an article and threw it out.
They really must have done something like that, because I wouldn't really give it too much of a hard time for being called the Moonlight Murders or anything like that.
I kind of like the name, and I didn't want to say that, but I kind of like it.
Well, then say that.
Well, you can't say you like that.
You said the opposite.
Well, no.
Yeah.
The movie is cheesy. The name is cool.
Okay.
Moonlight Murders is cool.
Okay.
What is happening right now?
I don't know what just happened, but you know what?
The movies.
Let's go ahead and get into the crimes. We got to bring this back to realism. New episodes are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsider.com. You can also hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider if you would like. Film and true crime fans are always debating how true their true crime is. So pull the car over, Ease your seat back. Let's shine our lights on the town that dreaded sundown. Texarkana is a twin city, meaning there are cities both in Texas's Bowie County and Arkansas's Miller County. So each state owns a little piece of Texarkana. Beginning on February 22nd, 1946, a maniac in a hood decided he wanted to take a piece of Texarkana for himself. It's just before midnight when Texarkana lovers Jimmy Hollis, who's 25, and his girlfriend Mary Jean Laurie, 19, leave a movie and decide to pull over to Lover's Lane, a secluded road on the outskirts of town. Jimmy and Mary relax in the car, doing what lovers do for several minutes when, out of nowhere, a man appeared, right in Jimmy's window. He was wearing a white hooded cloth mask with slits cut out for the eyes. He was shining a flashlight into the car, nearly blinding Jimmy. Jimmy explained that the man had the wrong people, to which the stranger replied, as he waved his gun, "I don't want to kill you, fella, so do what I say." The stranger demanded that both Jimmy and Mary Jean get out of the car, and they complied. The stranger proceeded to order Jimmy, "Take off your fucking pants," which Jimmy did. And then the stranger took his gun and hit him 2 times over the head. Mary later proclaimed that the attack on Jimmy was so loud, it almost sounded like a gunshot. Instead, it was the gun, fracturing Jimmy's skull in 2 places. Mary was understandably panicked. She grabbed Jimmy's wallet and showed the stranger that Jimmy had no money, hoping this would deter what she assumed was a robbery. But this wasn't a robbery. The stranger then hit Mary and ordered her to run. Mary did just that. First, she ran toward a ditch, and then she scrambled up the road. Mary was absolutely desperate to flee her attacker. Unfortunately, she never did, and the stranger caught up to her. When he did, he acted almost confused as to why she was running. When she explained that he told her to, he screamed that she was a liar. The stranger then proceeded to knock Mary down completely before taking his gun and sexually assaulting Mary with the barrel. What could have happened next did not, as the stranger was startled by a pair of headlights approaching. Mary then pulled herself together, got up, and ran to the nearest house, woke up the owners, and they called the police. Around the same time, Jimmy flagged down a passerby and asked them to call the police. 30 minutes later, the police did in fact arrive, led by Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley. One item of note, oddly, is that both Jimmy and Mary gave accounts of the attacker's appearance, and they were drastically different. Mary believed the stranger to be a black man, though light-skinned, while Jimmy believed him to be tan and white, though Jimmy does admit he had a flashlight in his eye when he first saw that stranger. Both proclaimed the stranger was 6 feet tall. At the time, for reasons we're not sure of, police believed Mary, in fact, knew her attacker, and that she was changing her description to cover for him. None of that proved to be true, or at least verifiable. Over a month later, on March 23rd, the stranger struck again. A passerby was driving down U.S. Highway 67 when he spotted a parked car on Lover's Lane, just off the road a ways. He notified the police, and when the police arrived, they found Richard Griffin, 29, shot twice in the back of the head with a .32 caliber revolver. Polly Ann Moore was 17. She was also shot in the back of the head. There was also evidence that Polly Ann was sexually assaulted. Griffin was found in the front seat with his pockets turned inside out, and Polly Ann in the back seat face down. though police do not believe they were murdered inside of that car due to forensic evidence. They believe they were placed back in the vehicle. As you can imagine, the town became panicked. Women were terrified. Men bought guns. Many townspeople stopped going out after sunset. No one knew when this hooded stranger, this rapist, this murderer, would strike again. They slept with their guns. They made pallets on the floor so their children could sleep beside them. Lawmen from Arkansas and Texas, as well as the national press, overwhelmed the town in pursuit of this monster. He became known as the Phantom Killer. The authorities, the people that these townspeople entrusted to find this killer, had no real leads, no true suspects. He was a phantom. He attacked, he terrorized, and then he vanished into the night. And on April 14th, 1946, he struck again. It was after 1 a.m. that Paul Martin, 17 years old, picked up Betty Jo Booker, 15 years old, from her performance at the local VFW in Texarkana. That was the last time either of them were seen alive. The next morning, Paul Martin's body was found in Spring Lake Park. Martin had been shot 4 times with the same .32 caliber revolver as the previous crimes. Through the back of the neck, in his right hand, his ribs, and through his nose. Betty Jo Booker was a far distance away from Martin's, whose body was already quite a distance from his car. Some reports put Betty Jo's body at almost 3 miles away from the car. Betty Jo was found fully clothed, but again with signs of sexual assault. She had been shot twice, once to the chest and once to the face. The terror continued. May 3rd, 1946. Virgil Starks was 37 years old. He was relaxing in his home, sitting in his favorite chair, reading the paper just before bedtime. Virgil was safe. He was in his own house. Why wouldn't he be? He had not driven out to Lover's Lane, nor did he take his wife, Katie, 36, anywhere that would seem to obviously attract attention. It was around 9 p.m. as he sat in that chair, when out of nowhere, Virgil was shot twice in the back of the head, with a .22 caliber revolver this time, through the window just behind his chair. Katie heard the commotion and she ran into the room, just in time to see Virgil jump up and then collapse to his death. As Katie lunged for the phone to call the authorities, she was then shot twice in the face from that same window. You might think Katie died instantly, but she didn't. Against all odds, Katie survived. Though she could barely see through the blood in her face and could not even see the Phantom Killer, Katie knew the killer was still surrounding the home. She heard him rustling around in the back of the house. While the killer lurked, planning his next move, toying with Katie, she made a break for it, straight out the front door. Katie first ran to the neighbor directly across the street, but no one was home. She then ran to the next neighbor, A.V. Prater, who did answer the door. After seeing the woman covered in blood proclaiming that Virgil was dead, Prater shot a rifle into the air and summoned another neighbor to help him as they took Katie directly to the hospital. She somehow miraculously survived. Another weapon was a .22 caliber, which was different than the .32 caliber of the previous murders. And a 1948 newspaper article disputed their connection. The police did find tire tracks that matched the previous crimes, so the authorities did link these crimes. This was also the end of the spree. 5 people shot dead, 3 horrifically assaulted or wounded, and psychologically scarred for life. Arkansas State Troopers Max Tackett and Charlie Boyd spotted an old parked car by the Starks property the night of the attack. Had the lawmen not been racing to drop off expense reports at headquarters, they might have checked out the suspicious car, but they were in a rush. Speaking of Max Tackett and the ensuing investigation, no one was ever officially charged and convicted with these horrific crimes. There were a few notable suspects, but investigator Tackett, as well as Tillman Johnson, believed wholeheartedly that the perpetrator was Ewell Lee Sweeney until their dying days. Max Tackett arrested Ewell Sweeney in the summer of 1946, July to be exact. You'll remember that the last attack was in May. Tackett had come to believe that cars were being stolen on the night of the attacks, and he found Sweeney to be a 29-year-old car thief who matched the description of the Phantom Killer by build. Tackett found the stolen car from the Starks attack and caught Sweeney's wife, Peggy, coming to retrieve it. Peggy confessed that Sweeney was in fact the Phantom Killer, and the police were able to corroborate some of her details. They even found some possessions of the victims, where Peggy indicated. This was somehow considered circumstantial evidence, though, and when Peggy became shaky with her testimony, the police became nervous. Then, Peggy recanted, and the police, due to some ridiculous law, could not compel her to confess to the murders against her husband. According to the book by James Presley, The Phantom Killer, Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, A Story of a Town in Terror, Sweeney was convicted of car theft in 1947, seemingly seen as a plea deal on the Moonlight Murders case, though no official conviction or confession exists on the record. Sweeney was released in 1973 after his conviction was overturned due to no counsel in 1947, and then he died in a nursing home in 1994. No one was ever caught, officially. No one was ever convicted. The Phantom Killer could have simply stopped or moved on. We will never know. The Texas Department of Public Safety once called the serial killings the #1 unsolved murder case in Texas history. And a fun fact, the Hookman urban legend, the one that begins with a young couple parked on a lover's lane and ends with them discovering a bloody hook on the car's door handle, that is said to have been inspired by the Texarkana murders, though the Phantom Killer did not use a hook. Nor was he ever caught. He just vanished into the night. Guys, you still there? That was a long one. Still alive?
Yeah, seems like we got a little problem with our justice system. Is where I'm at.
Well, that used to be a law, right? Where you could, if you were married to someone, you couldn't compel them to testify against them. Mm-hmm. It was one of the most insane laws I've ever heard of. Like, what if they're a monster? What if you've watched them kill 47 people? You can't make them testify?
I just mean the evidence being circumstantial seems bizarre. Like, if I have gold that I have buried and I know where X marks the spot and you've been looking for it, I stole it from you and I tell you where it's at and you find it, it's pretty coincidental that I happen to know that and you didn't.
Well, that's what circumstantial evidence is. Coincidental. It is pretty coincidental.
Yeah, and it's never really stopped anyone from being prosecuted and convicted before.
No, but it has stopped people from being charged, for sure. If she recants and then they can't force her to testify. They have to verify that she actually, there's a chain of evidence and whatnot. I don't know what was documented. I don't know what wasn't. It was 1946. It ain't like it was the same criminal justice system we have today.
I've mentioned this a couple times in some of the episodes where there was a period of time, and this definitely lands in that period of time, where it was a party for anyone who wanted to be able to get away with murder. And you didn't have the forensic technology you have today. You didn't have the speed of communication that we have today. There were so many things working to their favor to be able to commit something like this that it's just heartbreaking that people were able to do this. It's so much.
Well, and back then you couldn't actually get assistance in any quick length of time. You call the police, they arrive 30 minutes later. It isn't like today. I mean,
Right.
people get angry today if the police don't arrive 5 minutes after you call them. Back then, they would get there when they got there.
Not according to the town that dreaded sundown in 1976 or whatever.
We'll get to that.
So what do you think about these crimes? I mean, I don't know if you guys really, it sounds like you weren't familiar with the Moonlight Murders, obviously, because that name would have stuck. Amanda would really have been stoked for it.
Right, yeah. She would have been like, oh my God, there were these murders. They're called Moonlight Murders. And it's so cool. No.
So memorable.
No, this is my first experience seeing it because when you mentioned that this was actually based off a true story, I was surprised because I didn't think that was the case for this movie. The murders themselves, I found fascinating because it does seem like there's an escalation going on here, doesn't it?
There is an escalation, yes. And I think there's a little bit of, Amanda, you're our psych expert. You've got the degrees. So you correct me if I'm way wrong, but there seems to be a psychological aspect. Either the killer was toying with the first victims when he tells her that, you're a liar. I never told you to run. Or he has some kind of mental split and doesn't recall it.
Yeah, I would agree. It'd be one of those options.
Yeah, he's acting out some sort of fantasy in that process.
Well, that's the third option.
Right.
But we don't know. But they did escalate. I mean, the first two, I feel like he probably would have eventually murdered them. It was just a matter if he was distracted and put off by upcoming headlights. Because he didn't hesitate with anyone else. Or he learned from that one not to hesitate with anyone else, I guess is possible.
There's a higher possibility that he learned. He ultimately his goal is to scare and then kill somebody. And these people weren't just like murdered. So they weren't just like la 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 bang, I'm dead. No, there was an aspect of it where it was very personal, or at least it was personal to the killer, and he acted out several different fantasies in the process of like beating somebody, then talking to them, and then hurting them over and over, and then scaring the crap out of them, and then acting out these fantasies. There's a lot of interesting aspects to this.
Yeah, to me, there's obviously a lot of psychological manipulation that's happening in the order of events, the things that he would do, and how he would kind of toy with their emotions of if they're going to be safe or not. And then to not ever be the person who says, hey, that was me, or trying to get themselves positioned into the limelight. That part is also fascinating just because to me, then that takes away any desire for it to have motive for it to been related to like external validation and publicity and stuff like that. That means that he like really actually enjoyed doing this for his own pleasure. And there was like an intimate component to it because he would take people when they're in their most intimate and vulnerable moments. And obviously he'd have to be watching for a little bit too, to make sure that he timed things right. And then for him to keep it so private, I guess you would say, between him and the victims, it's like there was something enticing to him about it.
Yeah, and one thing I found fascinating about that, I mean, when you're talking about the intimacy, is, in this day and age, I think we're all pretty hyper aware of when people are behind us. When we're going anywhere, headlights, I have a rule. I never pull into my garage if there's anybody behind me. I just have a weird rule about it, just because I probably listen to too much true crime, as many of you have. But if you go back at that time, things were a lot more desolate. They didn't have streetlights everywhere. It was a lot darker around town. And I remember talking to someone not too long ago about this particular case. And I'm like, well, they go and they park in Lover's Lane. Who doesn't know that there's a car behind them, at that point? But if you're not taking the time into account, because at that time you could probably follow them with your lights off and just follow by their tail lights, and they would never know you were behind them because there weren't street lights. There weren't all of that ambient light that there is today.
And he was driving a black car.
I don't think it's so much that the killer was waiting at Lover's Lane for, I hope somebody shows up. It seems like it's more likely that they were following them. in some way. And they just didn't see them behind them because, well, they're focused on each other. And at that time, it wasn't a time to fear so much.
I mean, let's face it. They're probably more focused on each other in those moments than they were about the cars around them. They're going to get a job done.
Yeah, they're literally driving to a destination.
Yeah, but they also have after the first attack, you wonder, well, I guess, it's not today. You have to keep taking that into account. How many people are reading the paper? But it sounded like the town was terrified. So you would think that people would cease doing that. They would just say, you know what, we're not going to go to Lover's Lane. And it sounds like a lot of people did do that. But the particular, at least 2 of the attacks happened after the first one. And they were on Lover's Lane again, or a desolate road of some sort.
Yeah, but there's enough main character syndrome in people even then that people would be like, that would never happen to me. Why would I assume that would ever happen to me?
What do you mean main character syndrome?
The only person that really matters to them is themselves. They're not going to stop and think that this is something that's possibly going to happen to me. They're more intent of like, nothing's going to happen. Everything's going to be fine. And I'm just going to be able to do whatever I want to do.
That is a very common mindset and mentality for younger individuals in general, is that I'm invincible.
Sure.
I'm not going to get hurt. That just happened that one time. Like, think that was like a weird one-off situation. Like, we haven't seen this happen all the time. Like, you're overreacting, well, there's no way he'd hit the same spot twice. Like, there's so many ways that people can talk themselves into moving past what should make them scared or cautious.
I just want to point out how proud of myself I am. I had a great, horrible joke at that moment, and I didn't do it. I walked right past it, ignored it completely.
You can't do that and tell us, because now we need to know. No, I need to hear.
Well, I've done that twice, and I've got 2 kids to show for it. That was the joke.
Oh, well, that's a good joke.
Yeah, you're not joking about anything in here.
Yeah, no, that was a good joke. You could have really gotten away with that.
If it wasn't for those meddling kids.
I really expected a moment like this in the movie.
I want to ask you guys, if you went through this situation, right? Wherever you grew up, can you imagine having attacks like this happen, but them never catching the killer officially? Because in my mind, that would be something that it would be hard to ever move past. I would constantly be afraid to some degree, or at least extremely conscious of my surroundings at all times, and almost to the point of overthinking it. Or do you think it's very much like it would be today? Out of sight, out of mind. You get a few weeks from it, didn't happen, we move on.
I think I have a very different perspective than you two probably do.
Okay, well, give me your perspective.
Well, mine is, I'm a woman, so we always have to be extra cautious of our surroundings.
That's very true, and it's heartbreaking, but it's very true.
The only time that I shut my brain off in terms of like my surroundings is when I'm with somebody that I know, and there's like probably 2 or 3 people in this world, if that, where I'm like, oh, I know that I'm safe. Like, they are going to watch the surroundings and I'm good. So, but otherwise, I'm the type of person, I want my back to the wall in a room. I want to know like what's around me. I don't want anything behind me. I have been followed home, and they sat like at the end of my driveway. And that was really creepy.
Really? That's happened to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was always taught to like never take the same route twice.
Ever.
Like,
Nope.
Try to switch it up every day. Don't drive the same way. As much as you can, obviously, and like that you remember. And so I've always been very cautious of people following me. And I started like looping around the neighborhood, and they were still following me. And then I got away from them for a second, pulled into the driveway, and I was starting to get out. And that's when I noticed they were literally sitting at the end of the driveway in their car with the headlights on.
That's terrifying.
Blocking the driveway.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I was inside. I went inside.
Well, I mean, did you call the police? Was this a long time ago, I hope?
I think, because I was living with family, so I think we called the sheriff's department maybe.
Oh my
or
God.
we might, I can't remember. It was only like probably like 7 years ago, 6 years ago.
And you can
Maybe
never get that
less.
out of your hair, right? Or out of your head.
No. And I mean, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I had a boy who, I don't know why he didn't like me. I think he liked me, but didn't like me type of things. And I remember I like was going to a little school, like school council meeting, student council meeting or something like that. And I turned the corner and he like grabbed me by the neck and choked me up against the wall.
What?
In elementary school. So I've always had to be very aware of my surroundings because you just never know what's going to happen. You can literally turn the corner and someone can attack you. So
Well, that's a much different perspective for sure.
I sympathize for that perspective because I know just how oblivious I am to, like, I'm always very aware of my surroundings, but also, well, I got a whole lot of like giant white guy privilege that swings behind me too, which is that I'm a big guy. So I'm always going to look like a problem. I usually get left alone anyways, partially because I'm just, you know, a troglodyte. But besides that,
man, you should have grown up where I grew up because that wouldn't have mattered at all.
I grew up like I did a lot of my older growing up in Miami, so it's you know,
short kings will fight in Illinois. Let me tell you,
they would be gunning for you, my friend.
So anyhow, I was talking to a friend of mine who she was telling me that she goes and runs at 5 a.m. and wildly beautiful girl, and I'm like, what are you doing for your light situation? She's like, well, I just got this like vest that I put on. I'm like, that's not enough. You need to be able to see everything around you. And she's just like, no, I only run with one earphone in, and I'm very aware. I'm like, that's not enough. So I went out and bought her knuckle lights.
So you mansplained female security to her?
No, I just bought her knuckle lights. And
I don't think you understand the importance of your safety and how to do it properly, ma'am. So I'm going to need to take this one for you.
I was very...
I'm sure your intentions were noble. On the same token, all I hear is you're telling her she doesn't know how to protect herself.
Well, she didn't even know knuckle lights were a thing, so...
So it sounds like she can't protect herself, so maybe he did the right thing after all.
She didn't know knuckle lights were a thing, so I went and got the knuckle lights for her, and I handed them to her. And recently she sent me a message telling me how thankful she was to have those lights now, because she goes out running and she feels at least a little bit safer because she can easily point a light in whatever direction she feels nervous by, and it makes her feel quite a bit better.
Of knuckle lights.
Okay, well, we don't need to get into it.
Sounds like you need to invest in your safety too, Aaron.
Well, apparently. Well, I don't run at 5 a.m, number one. Find a better time.
You do like 5:36 a.m. It's the same thing.
Not anymore. No. I go a little later.
Too old now?
Yeah, kind of. We're wildly off topic.
Yeah. But it goes back to, like, as I've gotten older, whenever I'm in a relationship, I spend more time, like, all of a sudden, like, looking for all the exits and making sure everything's okay, and keeping track of all the, you know, the weirdos that are around. And that way the person that I'm with can feel the safety of being able to, like, just walk and be okay and have their own bit of safety along that moment.
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
You just got to be careful. Always got to be careful. And, you know, back in 1946, I feel like everyone probably felt safe a lot of the time. And even horrific crimes that did occur, unless you read the paper and they were reported, you never heard about them. It's not like, you know, it wasn't a constant barrage of negativity everywhere you went. We didn't have true crime podcasts to inform us of all of these things.
I had a moment of reflection there where I was like, God, I kind of wish I can go back to that time and feel that way.
Where it's just an innocent world.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
It's never been innocent for women.
It's fair.
That's fair.
Or people of color. We can have a whole different podcast on that.
Or gays.
Yep. There we go. Let's just keep going. Basically, John, we're the problem. That's all I know.
No, you guys just are statistically safer, I think. That's all.
All right, moving on. So Yule Lee Swinney. Let's talk about this particular individual. I want to remind everyone, this is alleged, was not convicted of anything, that there's a lot here to discuss, I would say. There seems to be a lot to indicate that he was likely, allegedly, the Phantom, and not the cool Billy Zane character. Sorry. A little too nerdy?
You went too far.
Someone out there appreciaes it.
I doubt it.
Yeah. There's like one person.
All right, so what do we think about
I was going to say, what was the question again? Where were we?
Yule Lee Swinney.
Stop saying his name like that.
Sweeney?
I feel like you're sounding it out every time you say
I
it.
am, because there is no proper pronunciation I could find, so I'm just guessing every time I say it.
He sounds terrible. I don't know what to tell you, Aaron. He sounds like a really awful guy who has like some serious, I don't know, fragile ego syndrome or something.
Why do you say that? Allegedly, by the way. Why is he?
Allegedly. Yeah. I don't know. Just to like never take accountability, even though your wife was like, yeah, man, he was out there slanging bodies and not in a good way. And he's just like,
okay,
back there chilling, letting his wife say whatever. I don't know. The method in which he would harm these women, like
but the Phantom Killer, not him. He wasn't convicted.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got to be careful how you phrase it.
I'm pretty sure his ghost will come haunt you if you don't get this right.
Who cares? Who's paying attention? Let's be honest.
Our listeners might be.
Well, you know what? I believe in ghosts, so maybe he's haunting me. Come here, bitch. Let's go. But for the Phantom Killer, just like I don't know, the fact that he would make them watch each other get beat and like he would assault them with tools and stuff. Like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like you have to be really like masochistic to take so much pleasure in making an ordeal and a scene out of it. And then after you murder them, like putting them back in the car and staging them, like that's, ugh. And then to just be a little pansy coward, I don't know, and just take it to your dying grave.
If he were the person, if he were the guy.
But yeah, but regardless, for Sweeney, like the individual, right, that we're talking about here, I've never known anybody to get like 30 years in prison for a car theft conviction.
Well, he'd been convicted a few times, so they said, well, you keep doing it. Yeah, it seems extreme.
I mean, have you seen how the DUIs work in the United States today?
It seems pretty extreme.
You get like 13, and then they're like, oh, I guess we should take your license away.
So a big story behind the scenes was that police used this as a, look, he's not going to cop to it, but he'll, as long as he doesn't get the death penalty, we can find out it's basically a plea deal of sorts. That was the rumor. So you believe in that?
I do. Yeah. I think that it's if we want to talk about circumstantial evidence and coincidental, this is coincidental as hell. That it just so happens to be right around the same time that he spends and he wouldn't have even gotten out if it wasn't for it getting overturned. And then to think that he was like taken care of in a nursing home. Ugh, gross.
You'd rather they just dump him in a plot somewhere?
Kinda. Tie him to a tree.
Just serial killer island? No, he didn't.
He died in a nursing home in 1994.
I literally said that earlier.
The thing that I have trouble with is that there's nothing in any of his history that points him to being capable of doing this. The car theft, there's nothing else that he's done where they can go, well, that looks a lot like what was happening in the Moonlight Murders. So the hearsay on it is kind of heartbreaking. I really wish they were able to find something else.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it feels like investigators and Presley, who was related, he was a nephew, I believe, to the case. His book was pretty detailed that they went down that rabbit hole that Sweeney was their guy. They did have other suspects. They had a H.B. Tennyson, Ralph Bauman, and a couple other people, but that was their main suspect. So the truth is, no one was ever convicted, and that's what really matters. No one was ever charged officially and convicted officially. But they did have a confession from the wife until she recanted, and the law says that she cannot testify. She cannot be compelled to testify against her husband at the time. And she was considered an unreliable witness. Fascinating case.
The wife always knows. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the movie, let's roll into the film. So, okay, as a standalone movie without any knowledge of the case, thoughts. I will admit it's not as terrifying as I remembered it. I hadn't seen it since I was a child, probably 7 years old.
Thanks for admitting that.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in a while. It was not as scary as I recall. I still thought there was a lot of parts that were good, though. I still think this is a solid, for its time, it's a solid thriller, just not really a horror movie. Now, what say you, Amanda, since apparently you have lots of comments about it behind the scenes?
Oh, it was just so cheesy in the acting, and it was so stupid in some of the plots, and oh my God, I was like, I'm glad this is only an hour and a half long so I can get through this. I will say some of the murder scenes felt very 70s campy horror, and I don't mind that. I think that that's great. But like one of them, and I can't remember which one her name was, but it's when she's in her white dress and she's tied up at the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a 5-minute ordeal for him.
Peggy Loomis is that character.
Okay. It's like a 5-minute ordeal getting her like tied to this tree and like killing, doing all the things with the trombone and all that. And the whole time it's like, I don't know. She has these like 30-second delays of whimpering and like screaming. So it's like, she's just sitting there. She's like, come on, Joe, let's go. I'm waiting. And then she's like, stop. And it's just very cheesy.
You weren't unnerved by that at all? I mean, when he takes the knife and puts it on the trombone and he uses it and that, nothing?
Was I unnerved? No. I think that it was, it was for a 70s movie, it was fine where he's like, when he actually is stabbing her with it and then she's like, like it's very, she is getting punctured by this. But it was like all the moments leading up to that where it was like she would have this delay in being scared and she would just be chilling for a few seconds. And I'm like, I don't know about you, girl, but I'm not chilling for anything. There's no vibes happening. Like I'm trying to get out of this and I'm sorry, homie, that you got taken away, but now's my time to shine and get out of here.
I just love how you segue from articulate, intelligent woman to, yo, homie, I ain't down with that.
Not sure how we get there at all.
So, John, what did you think about the town that dreaded sundown? Dog?
You're welcome.
I thought it was interesting because you can clearly see that this is the movie that became the archetype or precursor to the slasher genre, right? We know that the actual first movie that created the slasher genre was Halloween, but this is the precursor to it. And it's very evident by a lot of the things that happened here, because you can see like there's these moments that you can pick out from other movies that come out afterwards that the other movies just do them better. But tonally, it's everywhere. You have these moments where it's supposed to be tense and scary, but then you have Sparkplug, who's an idiot, and they make him into a clown, and I don't understand why he was necessary. Or the moments or the Charlie Chaplin police chase that they end up going everywhere or driving into the woods or driving into the lake. All these things were unnecessary for the story and didn't propel us to a direction of getting it completed. There's a lot of things like that where I'm like, all right, this is not cool. But I think the thing that jumped out at me the most was the second set of victims, because the man was 29 and the girl was 16.
It was the 40s. It's the 40s.
Now you're segueing back to the real.
In the movie, that was the age difference between the two victims.
Right, but you got to remember there were victims where the ages were disparate. Like there was a 29-year-old and a 17-year-old. I mean, that was something that happened back then.
Right. I guess it's something that happened. I was still floored by it. I was like, wow, these two people are going to go to the place for necking?
Can we stop calling it necking?
What do you call it?
Go listen to a Kevin Gates song. That's all I can tell you.
I don't even know who Kevin Gates is. God, how old am I?
Yeah, right?
There's a sound effect in his song called Eater. You're welcome.
I'm going to pass. John,
right.
back to you.
No,
back to you.
I'm going to go listen. I just thought it was adorable, like the difference in time, because, the first time we see somebody on Lover's Lane, he just puts his head in her lap and she's like, where's your other hand?
Yeah,
I mean, two pillows.
Yeah, it was between two pillows. Wrong movie. It was a interesting dynamic for sure. I mean, yes, it's very cheesy. One thing that I kind of found interesting is that they actually avoid, even though they they hint at it, but then they say specifically there was no sexual assault. So they avoided all aspects of the sexual assault piece of this true story.
Right.
If you notice that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that kind of fascinating as to why they would even bother avoiding it. If they're trying to this documentary quasi style.
Yeah, I don't get that at all. They blatantly show you the bite marks on somebody. They talk about how one of the victims got bitten and then like left to die. But yet there's no sexual assault or no sign of a rape. And it's I thought that was weird too.
It could have been them trying to get the story out there without it being shut down completely, because times were a little finicky in terms of like in the 70s of movies coming out and having that much gratuity shown. So maybe that was them just like, we don't want this movie to not happen. So let's just take like the easier route and just focus on murder, because sexual assault can't talk about that.
Fun facts, according to an interview with Andrew Prine, I think it was on the Shout Factory release, he had to write an ending for the movie because the script didn't have one. I don't know how true that is or how true that isn't, but it feels right.
Yeah, it does feel right. Because it kind of just ends, right? It kind of just goes, all right, and we couldn't find him.
Right. Yeah, it does.
I like some of the aspects they're playing into, as well as like what we know today to be what serial killers do in the movie, because there's those moments where they hint at the fact that he's listening to the police talk about the case. He's inserting himself in different places to learn about the case. Those are all things that we know today to be look out for, whereas back then I don't think it was as prevalent.
Can I call out one thing that drove me absolutely insane?
Oh, please do.
Spark plug?
So I think it's the first one when she's on the side of the road and she's got her arm out and she's like, help me. And the guy's like, oh, let me help you. And then like, I don't know, mere minutes pass by and he was somehow able to phone a friend in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere, get the police out there. And boy, were they speedy quick. Speedy quick. Never seen the police come out that quick.
We have no idea how much time passed.
The
it did not seem that fast to
sun was
me.
in the same space. Felt real fast to me.
You're talking about when they found the girl tied up to the tree, right?
No. When she's on the side of the road,
the opening
and
crime.
she's crawling out, and it's daylight, and then the guy is passing on the road,
and he almost crashes his car.
Mm-hmm. And then he's the one who clearly gets all the police and everything. But it's daytime, and they arrive like the sun is in the same position, okay? I'm not a sun.
You measured the shadows and everything.
No, but you can tell it looks exactly the same. It's not like it passed, like, started to turn into dusk.
It's a movie.
That should be accurate. Because otherwise it looks stupid, because we know they don't have cell phones.
I think you just hated this movie. That's what I think. I think you're being wildly nitpicky.
But that was the catalyst for me hating it. I was like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Like, there is no way that the police would have shown up that fast, figured out where they were in the middle of freaking nowhere. No GPS exists. And he somehow managed to hop his way over to somebody like in the nick of time and get them out. Like, no.
That's your biggest problem with this movie?
It is a problem. I wouldn't say it's the biggest.
That's where you draw the line,
biggest.
Right?
That's where the line started, John. The line began there.
Look, I'll be honest. I get where she's coming from. For continuity's sake, the sun has to move. Amanda's just right about this one.
And I couldn't take it seriously from then on.
So you laughed a lot.
It was the 1970s, for Pete's sake.
It was definitely a cheesy movie. Although the thing with Sparkplug, where they dress him up as a woman and they pretend to be a couple out there trying to lure the killer, that was actually a thing that happened. They did pose as couples. I don't know how into cosplay and role play they got, but they definitely were pretending to be couples to try to lure the killer out. It just didn't work. So that is a nod to something that happened.
Yeah, I mean, there seemed to be a lot of actually detailed nods, especially when I was listening to you give the story, right? I'm like, okay, well, that happened. All right, that happened too. That happened in the movie. Like, a lot of that was interesting just because of how much they tried to stick to the actual storyline, and I thought that was cool and made the movie cooler as you were telling the story. You know, I was like, oh wow, that's pretty neat. My only problem really is the whole like Keystone Cops aspects of everything.
Yeah, that part's true. That was a little ridiculous. The chase and the train chase and whatnot, that didn't work too well. I find it, I like Andrew Prine. He was great in V. If you ever watched V.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out like, where do I know him from? Oh, he was the commander from V. And Ben Johnson, the captain here that he's working with, you know, the old scraggly captain, he won an Oscar for The Last Picture Show. So Amanda, we're dealing with Oscar winners here. All right. Get
the hell out of here.
This is a high art film. This is a
high art film.
Yeah, it's class.
Oh my God.
All the way. So did the documentary style work for you, or was it a little odd how they chose to partially make it a documentary and partially it's a straight up thriller/horror movie?
If the tone stayed the way it was, the thriller aspects of it, probably would have been much better. But again, the Keystone Cops aspects where they play the dinky music and they have the dinky guy behind the desk, like all of that didn't work for me.
I don't think I need to reiterate, but most of this movie didn't work for me. So there's that. I think that there's a lot of potential for, I didn't see the remake, but for another movie to be made better.
The remake it's actually a better movie overall. I saw the remake first.
It's not a remake. I should clear that up. It's not a remake.
It's actually not a remake.
Yeah,
it's not? Is it like a reboot or is it?
It's basically like the town. It's what happens in the town decades later. Murders start happening again, right?
It's like a copycat or something like that. It's rated as a better movie overall on the tomato meter. The one thing I have to say about the sequel is that I don't remember. I know I watched it. I don't remember a thing about it. I will remember this.
Oh, this movie. Is that what you... Oh, I'm sitting here going, like, I remember this, and then you're going to name
I was waiting, too. I was like, is he going to get to it?
Or some description of something from the other movie. I don't remember the movie at all, but I remember this. And I'm like, oh, what's coming? And then nothing happened. I'm like...
Yeah.
Don't leave me hanging, bro.
I'll remember this movie. This movie will stick with me, probably for all the wrong reasons, but this movie will stick with me.
All right, so we already talked about kind of what the movie got right and what it got wrong. Do you think it respected the victims, and was it trying to be fair to the victims? I think is an important question. Amanda, since you like the movie the least, why don't you give us your take?
So I do think that not showing the gratuity of the sexual assault respects victims, but I don't think that like completely dismissing that it was reality to these individuals is the right decision either. Like, I think that they should have made it known that this is what happened. And there's ways to do that without showing it. And so then you can still respect the victims if that's where it came from. But I don't know, it bothers me whenever people leave out some of the most gut-wrenching parts of a crime. And it's like, it almost feels like it's lessening the severity of it. And that's something I don't like. So I don't know. It's tough because for a movie, do we need to see that? No. But is it more respectful of the victims to tell the whole true story? Yeah, in my opinion.
I think it really does respect the victims to a degree in which it keeps a lot of what happened to them more private. Lets the story be about the damage and harm that happened to them, as opposed to everything else on top of that. Ultimately, the movie is a tale of what to look out for. You know, it's something to haunt you, so you don't make the same kind of mistakes these people were doing. And I think it delivers on that pretty well for the time.
Yeah, it's definitely a cautionary tale. And look, I don't love the movie, but I just remember being creeped out by it. And I don't know how much, in hindsight, now that I'm looking at it, how much of that was because the mask is basically what they used for Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2 is like an homage, so which terrified me far more than this one did, rewatching it. But did it respect the victims? I think mostly. I feel like when you're removing the sexual assault in a way, they're trying to do that. But I agree with Amanda that it's the wrong way to do it. And if you're going to make something that's based on true crimes, I don't think you should be adding too much into it. And they add a lot into it, even though they're trying to tell the truth, but also like injecting a bunch. So like the 2 crimes where the victims were found just dead, they should have done just that. We shouldn't see the attacks because they were found just dead. That's the thing. You can have the killer in the accounts where the killer was actually there, where they have a victim that lived, because then at least they can attest to what happened to some degree. I think once you start injecting your own thoughts and ideas into it, it automatically lessens the victim's plight if you're trying to really be close to it. And this movie's very tricky to figure out. Are you trying to mimic it because you're so close to a lot of the details, but then it almost has that B-level horror vibe to it, where it feels like you're not trying to be too close to it. I mean, it's really trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, what would you guys have done differently? I'll tell you what I would have done is just made a straight up crime. I think the murders themselves are fascinating. You don't need to schlocken it up.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the thing that I would take out the most is all the schlock. It doesn't need to have any of that. It doesn't need to have the jokiness to it. It could just be the crimes and the investigation, and let the intensity build.
Maybe get rid of Sparkplug.
Oh yeah, I mean, or kill him.
It was a weird character because when you're first introduced to him, you almost think like he's a suspect because he's kind of a monster on the phone. Like he's basically threatening a kid and everything else. And where's this going? And then it's obvious that he's a complete homophobe later on. And I just don't know what the hell they're doing with this character. It's just a weird character.
Yeah, it's, again, too much.
Yeah, my biggest thing is, I mean, aside from the acting, which was problematic for me in terms
There's
of the
an
way
Oscar winner here.
Oh my God. But not for this.
Obviously.
And somebody from V.
Obviously. But I think I think that this has a lot of potential to be like a more riveting story. I think if they would have made it less campy horror and more just true crime thriller, which I think is what Aaron is saying, then I would have enjoyed it more. So
very much so. All right, well, that's The Town That Dreaded Sundown. That's one of my childhood classics that I'm going to take off that classic list because I just don't think it belongs anymore.
Oh, nostalgia.
Yep, it gets you every time. Every time. Well, thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, we really do appreciate it. And please make sure that if you enjoyed this podcast, you can share the show on your social media outlets. Give us a review in your favorite podcast app. You are obviously the best source of promotion, so please tell your true crime fans about it. It really does help us. So thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. You guys, anything in parting?
Don't play the trombone.
Watch who's around you. Make sure your back is to the wall. Don't trust anyone. Never take the same drive home if you can prevent it. Always watch out for who's around before you open your doors or get into your garage or anything like that. Make sure that you lock all your doors. Girls, ladies, fellas too. I mean, be cautious because you can't trust nobody.
Okay, well, thanks for those inspiring words from Amanda. And thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. Now let's keep those artists honest. Jesus, don't go outside, hide in the shack, never leave your basement.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah,
Also, put your keys where you can like stab someone with it. Always have it ready. Keep a knife in your car, mace in your purse, all the things.
I'm just warning anybody that's thinking about going to Amanda's house, don't. Even to visit. I'm starting to think maybe not even to visit. Might be dangerous for that too.
Yeah.
I've got a gun. I have a very excellent and precise shot. So come at me, bro.
So did I. Again, why I have 2 kids. Goodbye, everybody.
Bang!
Mic drop.